The snow was coming down in thick sheets when Natalie Morgan first saw him. A man in a worn jacket, trudging through the winter storm with 2 overstuffed grocery bags in his arms and a small girl clinging to his hand. She had just left her downtown office, her driver waiting at the curb with the heated Mercedes idling, and something about the scene made her pause. The man was tall, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind, and he kept looking down at the little girl with such tenderness that it made Natalie's chest tighten. The child could not have been more than 5 or 6, bundled in a pink coat that had seen better days, and she was struggling to keep up with her father's long strides through the deepening snow. Natalie watched as one of the grocery bags tore, sending cans rolling across the sidewalk. The man immediately set down the other bag and dropped to his knees, not seeming to care that the snow was soaking through his jeans. The little girl started picking up cans with her small, mittened hands, chattering away with what looked like encouraging words. There was something about the way he smiled at his daughter, brushing snow from her nose, that struck Natalie like a physical blow. She had never wanted children. She had never had time for relationships, not real ones anyway. At 32, she had built Morgan Financial from the ground up, turning her grandfather's small accounting firm into a multi-million-dollar investment company. She dated occasionally, always men who understood that work came first, men who wanted the same things she did. Power. Success. Recognition. But watching this man in the snow, watching him carefully place each can back into what remained of the torn bag, watching him sweep his daughter up onto his shoulders when she started to shiver, Natalie felt something shift inside her chest. "Miss Morgan, shall we go?" Her driver asked through the open car door. She found herself walking toward the man instead, her designer heels clicking on the icy sidewalk. "Excuse me," she called out. He turned, and she got her first good look at his face. He was younger than she had expected, probably around her age, with strong features and dark eyes that held a weariness she recognized from her own mirror. But there was warmth there too, a kindness that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep inside him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. "I saw what happened with your bag," Natalie said, suddenly feeling foolish. What was she doing? "There's a store just around the corner. My driver can take you there if you'd like to get a replacement bag or let me replace anything that was damaged." The man studied her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker across his face. Pride, maybe, or suspicion. "That's kind of you, but we're fine," he said. "Got everything picked up. We'll make it home okay." "Daddy, I'm cold," the little girl said from her perch on his shoulders. "I know, sweetheart, just a few more blocks." He looked back at Natalie and gave her a small nod. "Thank you anyway." He started to walk away, and Natalie stood there in the snow, watching him go. She should have let him walk away. She should have gotten in her warm car and forgotten all about the struggling father and his adorable daughter. Instead, she found herself following. "At least let me call you a cab," she said, catching up to him. "It's freezing out here and your daughter is cold." "Lady, I appreciate the concern, but we don't need charity," he said, not unkindly. "We're doing just fine." "It's not charity," Natalie said. "It's basic human decency. You're carrying heavy bags in a snowstorm with a small child. Let me help." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. "Why?" he asked simply. It was a fair question, and Natalie did not have a good answer. "Because you remind me that there's more to life than quarterly reports," she said honestly. Something in his expression softened. "Look, Miss Morgan, Natalie Morgan. I'm Henry Anderson. This is my daughter, Sophie." He gestured to the girl on his shoulders, who waved shyly at Natalie. "We really are okay. Our apartment is only 3 blocks from here, and Sophie's tough." "Aren't you, Princess?" "I'm very tough," Sophie confirmed, though her teeth were chattering. Natalie made a decision. "Then at least let me walk with you. I could use the exercise, and my driver can follow with the car in case anyone changes their mind." Henry looked like he wanted to argue, but another gust of wind made Sophie burrow her face into his hair. "Fine," he said, "but we're not getting in the car." They walked together through the snow, an odd trio. Natalie's driver followed slowly behind in the Mercedes, and Natalie found herself asking questions. She learned that Henry was a single father, that Sophie's mother had left when Sophie was just a baby, that he worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. He was a mechanic during the day and did security work 3 nights a week. His mother watched Sophie when he worked nights, but she had been sick lately, which meant he had to cut back on his security hours. "What about you?" Henry asked as they turned onto a quieter residential street. "What does Natalie Morgan do when she's not offering rides to strangers?" "I run a financial investment firm," Natalie said. "So you're rich," Sophie piped up from Henry's shoulders. "Sophie," Henry said, his tone reproachful, "that's rude." "It's okay," Natalie said, laughing. "Yes, I suppose I am, but that doesn't mean I'm happy." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Henry. He gave her a curious look. "Why not?" "Because money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy what you have," Natalie said, gesturing to Sophie. "Purpose. Someone who loves you unconditionally." "Oh, I love Daddy very much," Sophie said seriously. "He's the best daddy in the whole world." Henry's face softened, and he reached up to squeeze his daughter's hand. "And you're the best daughter in the whole world." They reached a modest apartment building with peeling paint and a broken front step. Henry carefully lifted Sophie down from his shoulders and set her on the ground. "This is us," he said. Natalie looked at the building, then at Henry, then at Sophie, who was watching her with big, curious eyes. "Thank you for letting me walk with you," she said. "Thank you for the company," Henry said. He hesitated, then added, "You seem like a nice person, Miss Morgan. I hope you find what you're looking for." Natalie wanted to say something more, wanted to ask if she could see him again, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she watched as Henry and Sophie disappeared into the building, and then she walked back to her waiting car. That night, alone in her penthouse apartment, Natalie could not stop thinking about Henry Anderson and his daughter. She kept seeing the way he had smiled at Sophie, the gentleness in his rough hands as he had picked up those cans in the snow. She had met countless men over the years, wealthy men, powerful men, men who could buy her anything she wanted. But she had never met anyone who had made her feel the way Henry Anderson did after just a 20-minute walk through the snow. The next morning, Natalie found herself driving past that apartment building on her way to work. She told herself she was just being silly, that she was just curious. But she knew the truth. She wanted to see him again. Over the following week, Natalie made excuses to be in that neighborhood. She found a new coffee shop to frequent during her lunch breaks, one that was conveniently located 2 blocks from Henry's building. She never saw him, though she looked for him every time she was there. She was beginning to think she had imagined the whole encounter when she walked into the coffee shop one Tuesday afternoon and saw Sophie sitting at a corner table with an elderly woman who must have been Henry's mother. Sophie was coloring in a coloring book, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Natalie bought her coffee and found herself walking over to their table. "Sophie," she said, "do you remember me?" Sophie looked up and her face brightened. "You're the pretty lady who walked with us in the snow." The elderly woman looked at Natalie with sharp, assessing eyes. "I'm Ruth Anderson," she said, "Henry's mother." "Natalie Morgan," Natalie said, offering her hand. "I met your son and granddaughter last week." "Henry mentioned you," Ruth said, and there was something knowing in her tone. "Said some fancy businesswoman followed him home in the snow." "I didn't follow him home," Natalie protested, then realized how it sounded. "I mean, I did walk with them, but it wasn't like that. I just wanted to help." Ruth studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair at their table. "Sit," she said. It was not a request. Natalie sat. "My son is a good man," Ruth said without preamble. "He works himself to the bone for that little girl. He doesn't have time for games or for people who are just looking for some kind of project to make themselves feel better." "I'm not looking for a project," Natalie said quietly. I honestly don't know what I'm looking for. Ruth's expression softened slightly. That's the most honest thing you could have said. She paused, then added, he works at Mike's auto shop on 4th Street, gets off at 6. Natalie felt her heart skip. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ruth said. If you hurt my boy or my granddaughter, you'll answer to me. I won't hurt them, Natalie said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That evening at 6:15, Natalie found herself standing outside Mike's auto shop. Through the large garage door, she could see Henry working on a car, his movements efficient and sure. He was wearing grease-stained coveralls, and there was a smudge of oil on his cheek. She stood there for 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Finally, Henry looked up and saw her. His expression registered surprise, then something else. Pleasure, maybe, or hope. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to her. Miss Morgan, he said. Natalie. Hi, she said, suddenly feeling like a teenager with a crush. I ran into Sophie and your mother at the coffee shop today. Your mother told me where you worked. Did she now? Henry said, shaking his head with a small smile. My mother is not subtle. She loves you, Natalie said. That's clear. I'm lucky to have her, Henry agreed. He studied Natalie for a moment. Why are you here? Because I can't stop thinking about you, Natalie said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know that sounds crazy. I know we only met once, and I know our lives are completely different, but I haven't been able to get you out of my mind. Henry was quiet for so long that Natalie thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then he said, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either. Relief flooded through her. Really, he said. Sophie talks about you constantly. She thinks you're some kind of fairy godmother. He paused. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that you were this successful businesswoman who probably just felt sorry for us. But then my mother came home today and said you'd been at the coffee shop and that you seemed genuine. I am genuine, Natalie said. Henry, I know this is unconventional, but would you like to have dinner with me? You and Sophie both. I want to get to know you better. Henry looked back at the garage, then at Natalie. I can't do fancy restaurants, he said, and I can't afford to take you anywhere nice. Then let me cook for you, Natalie said. Come to my place this Saturday. I'll make dinner and Sophie can play with my sound system. I have one of those voice-activated ones that plays music. Kids love it. You want to cook for us, Henry said slowly. I want to spend time with you, Natalie corrected. Both of you, please say yes. Henry smiled and it transformed his whole face. Okay, he said. Yes, we'll come to dinner. Natalie spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous excitement. She planned the menu carefully, choosing foods that would appeal to a 6-year-old while still being impressive enough to show Henry that she had put in effort. She cleaned her already spotless apartment twice. She bought games and puzzles that might entertain Sophie. On Saturday evening, her doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. When she opened the door, she found Henry standing there in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. Sophie was beside him in a dress that looked new, her hair pulled back in a careful ponytail. Hi, Henry said, looking nervous. Hi, Natalie said, stepping back to let them in. Welcome. Sophie's eyes went wide as she took in the penthouse apartment. Wow, she breathed. You live in a castle, Natalie laughed. It's just an apartment, but thank you. Would you like to see the music system I told your dad about? Sophie nodded enthusiastically, and Natalie spent the next 10 minutes showing her how to ask the smart speaker to play different songs. Sophie was delighted, requesting everything from Disney songs to pop music. While Sophie was occupied with the music, Natalie and Henry stood in the kitchen together. Can I help with anything? Henry asked. You can open the wine, Natalie said, handing him a bottle and a corkscrew, and you can tell me if I'm completely out of my depth here. With cooking. Henry asked, expertly opening the wine. With all of this, Natalie said, gesturing between them. I don't usually do this. I don't usually invite men I barely know to my apartment. I definitely don't usually cook for them. What do you usually do? Henry asked. Work, Natalie said honestly. I work all the time. I have lunch meetings and dinner meetings and breakfast meetings. I don't remember the last time I cooked a meal that wasn't microwaved. Henry poured them both a glass of wine. Then why am I here? Because you made me remember that there's supposed to be more to life than work, Natalie said. Because when I saw you with Sophie in the snow, I saw something I didn't know I wanted. Connection. Real, honest connection. Henry set down his wine glass and moved closer to her. I make barely enough to support my daughter, he said quietly. I live in a crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood. I work constantly and I'm tired all the time. I'm not some fairy tale prince. I don't want a fairy tale prince, Natalie said. I want someone real, someone who knows what matters. And you think that's me? I think you might be, Natalie said. They stood there in her kitchen, the sounds of Sophie singing along to a pop song drifting in from the living room, and Natalie felt something shift and settle inside her. This was right. This was real. Dinner was a success. Sophie loved the pasta Natalie had made, and Henry ate 2 helpings of everything. They talked and laughed, and Natalie learned more about their lives. She learned that Sophie wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because she loved animals. She learned that Henry had been an engineering student in college before Sophie's mother got pregnant, and he had dropped out to support his family. She learned that his favorite food was pizza, that he was terrible at remembering to match his socks, and that he read to Sophie every single night before bed. She told them about her own life, about growing up with parents who never had time for her, about building her company from nothing, about the loneliness that came with success. Sophie listened with rapt attention, and Henry watched Natalie with an expression she could not quite read. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on Natalie's couch, curled up with a stuffed animal she had found in one of Natalie's guest rooms. Henry carefully covered her with a blanket, then joined Natalie on the balcony overlooking the city. Thank you for tonight, he said. Sophie had a wonderful time. What about you? Natalie asked. Did you have a wonderful time? Henry turned to look at her, and in the glow of the city lights, his eyes were dark and warm. I had an amazing time, he said. But Natalie, I need you to be sure about this, about us. Because Sophie is the most important thing in my life, and if you're going to be part of our lives, I need to know you're in this for real. I'm in this for real, Natalie said without hesitation. Henry, I know we're still getting to know each other, but I haven't felt this way about anyone in my entire life. You make me want things I never thought I wanted. Like what? Like family, Natalie said softly. Like coming home to people who are happy to see me. Like being more than just my job. Henry reached out and took her hand, his fingers rough and warm against hers. I can't give you expensive things, he said. I can't take you to fancy places or buy you jewelry. I don't want expensive things, Natalie said. I want Sophie. I want movie nights and family dinners and all the normal things I never had growing up. Henry pulled her closer, and Natalie felt her breath catch. I want those things too, he said. I want them so much. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Natalie felt like she was finally coming home. Over the next few months, Natalie and Henry built something beautiful together. They moved slowly, carefully, always making sure Sophie was comfortable with the changes. Natalie started joining them for dinner at Henry's apartment, learning to navigate the cramped kitchen and the temperamental heating system. Henry and Sophie spent weekends at Natalie's place, and gradually, her sterile penthouse began to feel like a home. Natalie cut back on her work hours, delegating more to her capable staff, and actually leaving the office before 7 in the evening. She attended Sophie's school events, cheering loudly at her dance recital and helping with her science fair project. She fell completely in love with the little girl who called her Nat and drew her pictures at school, and she fell even more deeply in love with Henry. She loved the way he was with Sophie, patient and kind, even when he was exhausted. She loved his quiet strength, the way he faced every challenge without complaint. She loved his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he always made sure everyone else was taken care of before himself. They faced obstacles, of course. Some of Natalie's business associates raised eyebrows when she showed up to events with a mechanic as her date. Henry struggled with accepting help, even when Natalie offered it from a place of love rather than pity. They argued about money and pride and what it meant to be a family. But they worked through it all because what they had was real and worth fighting for. 6 months after that snowy evening when they first met, Henry invited Natalie to a special dinner at his apartment. She arrived to find the small space transformed with candles and flowers, Sophie conspicuously absent. "Where's Sophie?" Natalie asked as Henry took her coat. "At my mother's," Henry said. "I wanted tonight to be just us." He had cooked her favorite meal, and they ate by candlelight, talking and laughing like they always did. After dinner, Henry took her hand and led her to the couch. "Natalie," he said, his voice serious, "when I met you, I was just trying to get through each day. I was working myself to death, barely making ends meet, and I had convinced myself that this was all my life would ever be. But you changed everything." "Henry," Natalie started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish," he said. "You came into our lives like a miracle. You made me remember that I was more than just Sophie's dad, more than just a guy trying to survive. You made me feel like I could be someone worth loving." "You are worth loving," Natalie said fiercely. "You're the best man I've ever known." Henry smiled. "You changed my life, Natalie Morgan. You and Sophie, you're everything to me. And I know we've only been together for 6 months, and I know some people might say it's too soon, but I also know that I don't want to spend another day without knowing that you're mine forever." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Natalie saw a simple diamond ring, modest but beautiful. "I saved for 3 months to buy this," Henry said. "It's not as fancy as what you could buy yourself, but I wanted to give you something that came from me. Natalie, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Natalie's face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Henry, I'll marry you, and this ring is perfect because it came from you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and Natalie felt complete in a way she never had before. They picked up Sophie from Ruth's house that night to tell her the news together. When Sophie opened the door, she took one look at their faces and squealed. "Are you getting married?" "How did you know?" Natalie asked, laughing. "Daddy told me he was going to ask you," Sophie said, launching herself at Natalie. "I told him you would say yes because you love us." "I do love you," Natalie said, holding the little girl tight. "So much." Ruth appeared in the doorway, wiping tears from her eyes. "Well," she said gruffly, "it's about time." They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Natalie wore a simple white dress, and Sophie was her flower girl in a pink dress that she had chosen herself. Henry wore a suit that actually fit him properly, and when Natalie walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face made her heart soar. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Henry promised to love her through good times and bad, to support her dreams while sharing his own, to build a life together that honored both of their pasts while looking toward their future. Natalie promised to cherish him and Sophie, to remember what really mattered, to choose love over work and family over ambition. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sophie cheered so loudly that everyone laughed. Henry kissed Natalie, and she thought about that snowy evening when she had first seen him struggling through the storm with his daughter. She had known then, on some level, that he was going to change her life. She just had not known how completely. After the wedding, Natalie sold her penthouse, and they bought a house together in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. It was smaller than her penthouse had been, but infinitely warmer, full of laughter and love and the everyday chaos of family life. Natalie remained CEO of Morgan Financial, but she restructured her schedule to allow for real work-life balance. She worked from home 2 days a week and made it a policy never to miss Sophie's school events. Her company thrived under this new approach, and Natalie discovered that she was actually a better leader when she was not constantly exhausted and stressed. Henry eventually left his second job, and with Natalie's support, he enrolled in night classes to finish his engineering degree. It took him 3 years, but he persevered, studying after Sophie went to bed and on weekends. Natalie was there for every late-night study session, quizzing him for exams and celebrating each completed semester. Sophie flourished in their new life. She had her own room for the first time, painted lavender at her request. She joined the school's science club and the local youth soccer league. She called Natalie Mom without anyone suggesting it, the word appearing naturally one evening at dinner. Natalie had cried happy tears while Sophie looked on in confusion, not understanding why the simple word meant so much. 2 years after their wedding, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Henry on a quiet Sunday morning, just the two of them in their kitchen while Sophie was still asleep. Henry had stared at her in shock, then swept her into his arms and spun her around. "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, a little uncertain. They had never explicitly discussed having more children. "Happy," Henry said. "Natalie, I'm ecstatic. You've given me so much already. Now this, another child." "With you." "Sophie's going to be a big sister," Natalie said, and they both laughed at the thought. When they told Sophie later that day, she was indeed thrilled. She immediately began planning all the things she would teach her baby sibling and insisted on coming to every doctor's appointment. The pregnancy was smooth, and 7 months later, Natalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Henry Anderson, and from the moment he was born, he was adored by his entire family. Sophie was a devoted big sister, and Henry was just as gentle and patient with James as he had been with Sophie. Watching Henry with their son, seeing the way he cradled the tiny baby against his broad chest, Natalie often thought back to that snowy evening. She thought about how close she had come to just getting in her car and driving away. How different her life would be now if she had not followed her instincts and walked over to that struggling father in the snow. She never regretted her choice, not for a single moment. James was 6 months old when Henry graduated with his engineering degree. The entire family attended the ceremony, baby James sleeping peacefully in Natalie's arms while Sophie waved a homemade sign that read, "Congratulations, Daddy." Henry walked across the stage to receive his diploma, and when he looked out into the audience and found Natalie's eyes, the love and gratitude in his expression made her throat tight with emotion. He got a job at a prestigious engineering firm, and while his starting salary was modest by Natalie's standards, it was enough that he could truly contribute to their household expenses in a way that satisfied his pride. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing responsibilities and decisions, supporting each other's dreams and goals. Life was not always perfect. They argued sometimes about parenting decisions or finances, or whose turn it was to get up with James in the middle of the night. They struggled through the terrible twos, through Sophie's preteen mood swings, through the exhaustion that came with managing 2 careers and 2 children. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. When Sophie was 13, she came home from school one day and found Natalie in the kitchen making dinner. "Mom," she said, using the title she had claimed years ago, "we have to do a project for school about people who inspire us. Can I interview you and Dad?" "Of course," Natalie said. "What kind of questions do you need to ask?" Sophie pulled out a worksheet. "It says to ask about how you met and what made you fall in love." She paused. "I don't think I've ever heard the full story. I remember you walking with us in the snow, but that's all." So Natalie told her. She told her about seeing Henry in the snow, about the way he had been so devoted to his daughter, even in difficult circumstances. She told her about being drawn to Henry's strength and kindness, about knowing immediately that he was different from anyone she had ever met. "But you were so different," Sophie said. "Rich and poor, wasn't that hard?" "Sometimes," Natalie admitted. "But the things that mattered, we were the same. We both valued family, we both believed in working hard, we both wanted to build something real and lasting. Do you ever regret it?" Sophie asked, "Giving up your fancy life for us?" Natalie pulled Sophie into a hug. I didn't give anything up, she said firmly. I gained everything. My fancy life was empty, sweetheart. You and your dad and James, you're what made it full. Sophie hugged her back tightly. I'm glad you followed us home that day. So am I, Natalie said. So am I. Henry came home later that evening, James toddling beside him. At 3 years old, James was the spitting image of his father, all dark eyes and strong features. He ran to Natalie with his arms out, and she scooped him up and covered his face with kisses. They had dinner together as a family, talking about their days, making plans for the weekend. It was ordinary and domestic and perfect. After dinner, Henry helped James brush his teeth while Natalie cleaned up the kitchen. Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table, occasionally asking Natalie questions. Later, after the children were in bed, Henry and Natalie sat together on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. Sophie interviewed me today, Natalie said, for a school project about people who inspire her. What did you tell her? Henry asked, his fingers playing with her hair. I told her the truth, Natalie said. That meeting you and Sophie changed my entire life. That I didn't know what love was until I saw you carrying those groceries through the snow. Henry was quiet for a moment. I was so angry that day, he said. Angry at the world, at my circumstances, at everything. Then you appeared like some kind of angel, and I thought you were just another rich person trying to ease their conscience. What changed your mind? Natalie asked. You did, Henry said simply. You were genuine. You saw me, really saw me, not just as a charity case, but as a person. And you saw Sophie, and you loved her immediately. I could tell. I did love her immediately, Natalie said. And I loved you, though it took me a little longer to admit it. Best thing I ever did was let you walk us home, Henry said. He tilted her face up to his and kissed her gently. You saved us, Natalie. No, Natalie said. We saved each other. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Sophie graduated high school with honors and got accepted to veterinary school, fulfilling her childhood dream. James grew into a bright, curious boy who loved both science and sports. Natalie's company continued to thrive, and Henry moved up steadily in his engineering firm. They took family vacations, camping in national parks and visiting beaches. They hosted holidays at their house, filling it with extended family and friends. They supported each other through hard times and celebrated victories together. When Sophie was 22, and in her final year of veterinary school, she came home for Thanksgiving with a young man named David. He was kind and respectful, and Henry grilled him thoroughly while Natalie tried not to laugh. After David had gone to bed in the guest room, Sophie found Natalie in the kitchen. I think David might be the one, Sophie said, her eyes shining. Is that crazy? I'm only 22. I don't think it's crazy at all, Natalie said, thinking back to how young she and Henry had been when they knew. Age doesn't matter when you find the right person. How did you know Dad was the right person? Sophie asked. Natalie thought about it. I saw the way he loved you, she said. I saw his character, his strength, his kindness. I saw who he was when things were hard, and I knew that was the kind of person I wanted to build a life with. David is kind, Sophie said. He's patient and smart, and he makes me laugh, and he loves animals almost as much as I do. Then I think you should listen to your heart, Natalie said. Sophie was indeed right about David. They were engaged a year later and married the year after that. Natalie and Henry gained a son-in-law who fit seamlessly into their family. And 2 years later, they became grandparents when Sophie had twins, a boy and a girl. Holding her grandchildren for the first time, Natalie marveled at the turns life had taken. She thought about the woman she had been before Henry, driven and successful but fundamentally alone. She thought about how close she had come to missing all of this. What are you thinking about? Henry asked, coming to stand beside her in the hospital room while Sophie slept. I'm thinking about that snowy evening, Natalie said. About how one decision changed absolutely everything. Henry wrapped his arm around her. Do you remember what you said to me that night when I asked why you wanted to help? I said you reminded me that there was more to life than quarterly reports, Natalie said. You were right, Henry said. There is so much more, and we found it together. James was 15 now, already taller than Henry and showing promise as both a student and an athlete. He was a good kid, responsible and caring, and Natalie loved watching him grow into a fine young man. He adored his father and worked hard to make both his parents proud. One evening, James came to Natalie's home office where she was finishing up some work. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Always," Natalie said, closing her laptop. "Some kids at school were talking about how you're rich and Dad came from nothing," James said. "They said Dad only married you for your money." Natalie felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice calm. "What do you think?" "I think they're idiots," James said fiercely. "I've seen the way Dad looks at you. I've heard the stories about how you met. Dad would never do that." "You're right," Natalie said. "Your father married me because we love each other. The money was actually an obstacle at first, not a benefit. Your dad is proud, and he wanted to make sure he could provide for his family on his own." "I know," James said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." Natalie pulled James into a hug. "Your father is the best man I know," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." "I won't," James promised. As the years passed, Natalie gradually began to step back from the day-to-day operations of Morgan Financial. She promoted capable people to leadership positions and transitioned into more of an advisory role. It gave her more time to spend with Henry, with their children and grandchildren, and to pursue hobbies she had never had time for before. Henry retired from engineering at 65, and they began to travel more, taking trips they had always dreamed about. They visited Europe, exploring ancient cities and beautiful countryside. They went on safari in Africa. They spent a month in Australia, where Sophie had moved with David and the twins for his work. Through it all, their love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses. They had built a life together from nothing, and it was more beautiful than anything Natalie could have imagined. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at their house for a celebration. Sophie was there with David and the twins, who were now teenagers themselves. James came with his wife, a lovely woman named Emma, whom he had met in college, and their young son. Ruth was still alive at 93, sharp as ever and still making sure everyone was properly taken care of. As Natalie looked around the room at all these people, this family she and Henry had created together, she felt overwhelming gratitude. They had started with so little, just a struggling single dad and a lonely businesswoman who had taken a chance on each other. And they had built this, a legacy of love and family that would extend for generations. Henry found her later that evening, standing on their back deck and looking up at the stars. "Hey," he said, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. "What are you doing out here all alone?" "Just thinking," Natalie said, leaning back against him. "Remembering." "Good memories?" he asked. "The best," she said. She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Henry Anderson. Thank you for letting me walk you home in the snow all those years ago." Henry smiled, the same warm smile that had captured her heart 3 decades earlier. "I love you too, Natalie Anderson. Thank you for seeing me, for seeing us, for taking a chance on a poor mechanic with a kid." "You were never just a poor mechanic with a kid," Natalie said. "You were everything I needed, everything I wanted, everything I didn't know I was looking for." He kissed her then, under the stars in the backyard of the home they had built together, and Natalie felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt the first time he kissed her all those years ago. Some things never changed. Some loves never faded. Inside, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sounds of love and life and connection. This was what mattered, not money or status or power, just love in all its messy, beautiful, complicated glory. "Should we go back inside?" Henry asked. "In a minute," Natalie said. "I just want to hold on to this moment a little longer." So they stood there together, wrapped in each other's arms, and Natalie sent a silent thank you to whatever force had made her stop that snowy evening so many years ago. She had been given a gift that day, standing on that icy sidewalk watching a father struggle through the snow with his daughter. She had been given the chance to find real love, real family, real happiness, and she had taken it. That made all the difference. As they finally went back inside to rejoin their celebration, Natalie caught Sophie's eye across the room. Her daughter smiled at her, that same knowing smile she had given Natalie when she was just 6 years old, and declaring that the pretty lady loved them. Sophie had been right then, and she was right now. Love was the answer to everything. The party continued late into the evening, filled with stories and laughter and love. Little Henry, James and Emma's 3-year-old son named after his grandfather, fell asleep in his namesake's arms. The twins taught everyone a new card game they had learned in Australia. Ruth told embarrassing stories about Henry as a child that made everyone laugh. It was perfect. Messy and chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed in various guest rooms throughout the house, Henry and Natalie lay together in their bed. 30 years, Henry said quietly into the darkness. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like 30 days, Natalie said. Other times it feels like we've always been together. I hope we have another 30 years, Henry said, and another 30 after that. That would make us over 100 years old, Natalie pointed out, laughing. Then we will be over 100 years old together, Henry said. He pulled her closer. I mean it, Natalie. I want forever with you. You have forever with me, Natalie promised. No matter what comes, we face it together, just like we always have. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they had built something unshakable. Their love had weathered every storm, overcome every obstacle. It would continue to do so for as long as they both lived. In the morning, Natalie woke to find Henry already up, standing at the window and looking out at their backyard. She joined him, sliding her arms around his waist. What are you looking at? It snowed last night, Henry said, gesturing to the white blanket covering their yard. First snow of the season. Natalie looked out at the snow and smiled. Remember the first time I saw snow after we got together? You and Sophie took me to that park and we built a snowman. Sophie insisted it needed a carrot nose and button eyes, Henry remembered. We had to raid the kitchen for supplies. Best snowman I ever made, Natalie said. They stood there together, watching the snow fall, and Natalie thought about circles and fate and second chances. She thought about the woman she had been, seeing Henry struggle through the snow with his groceries and his daughter. She thought about how that one moment of compassion, that one decision to reach out, had led to all of this. She would never regret it, not in a million years. I love you, she said to Henry, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. I love you too, Henry said, always. And in that moment, standing in their home with their family sleeping around them and snow falling outside, Natalie Anderson knew she had found everything she had ever needed. She had found love. She had found family. She had found herself. All because she had stopped on a snowy evening and offered help to a struggling father carrying groceries through the storm. All because she had seen past the surface to the beautiful, kind, strong man underneath. All because she had been brave enough to take a chance on something real. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, and Natalie held onto Henry and smiled. This was her life now. This was her forever. And she would not change a single thing about it. This was the happy ending she had never known she was looking for. This was home.